I am having the most delightful experience having Joseph as part of our salon. And we had met, what year were we preparing? 14?
2014.
So Madhu and I were diligently dealing with vanishing beauty. And I don't know why I went searching for Buddhist dance. I think because of all the Buddhist material in the collection. And I came across Joseph and I searched him out. We made contact and I had him over to the house and he walked in, and all of you know what the house looks like. And he's going crazy with the Buddhist material. And we would talk about 3 words and then go on to something else. But it was all free-flowing, excited, delighted. And he was going off to Ladakh literally 3 days later, I think. And he filmed one of his close friends and her daughter or niece.
Which one?
Dressing Ladakh.
Both. Daughter and the niece got dressed. You're right. The niece.
Right. And he did this incredible film, which was the first thing you saw when you walked into the exhibition. Since then, and I sent you the bio, Joseph has been involved with many museum exhibitions. I envy him because he is climbing up to remote villages and monasteries in Ladakh. And I wish I were there with him, but I get to see the film and share the experience. And there's something quite marvelous about receiving emails from Ladakh. So I will turn this over to Joseph, and he's wonderful.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I want to say thank you for inviting me to the salon, all these wonderful people. I know a few of you. Diane, I've been thinking of you because Theosophists have been popping up in my research in the most unexpected places, and I've been tempted to just pop you a note, so maybe I have an overdue text to you about all of this interesting information. Barbara and I have become very good friends because she's one of the few people on the planet that, like me, knows about the Himalayas and knows a lot about classical ballet. And there's not a lot of people that have both of those expertises at hand. And there have been so many times we've met for dinner and like, Barbara, you're the only person I can talk to about this certain thing. So I'm very happy to be here and to talk with you today. I'm going to switch to my share screen now and get you on the same page as me. And you should be seeing now a logo of Core of Culture. Are you all seeing that?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, good. Let me get some people out of the way here a minute and hide these people. There we go. Okay.
I think you need to do slideshow.
Yeah, I had to get everybody out of my way first to move you off to the side so I can see what's going on. Are we there?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to talk today about Core of Culture, the organization I founded 20 years ago. 2020 is the 20th anniversary of the founding of Core of Culture. Some of you, like Betty, knew me way back when we started this whole project. Core of Culture is an organization dedicated to safeguarding intangible world heritage. And that means endangered dances. It means forms of meditation that are rare and dying out, martial arts, embodied spiritual practices that have never been documented. And this is the bulk of our work. We specialize in the Himalayas and more specifically in the Buddhist ritual arts. We create preservation strategies. We find out what the problem is and try to help them with the problem. Maybe the problem is didactic, maybe it's political, maybe it is within the ranks of their files to get more monks to join. Maybe it's in the transmission itself. We create archival documentations working in partnership with the New York Public Library Dance Division, which is the foremost dance collection in the world. It's our primary partnership, Core of Culture, working with the New York Public Library Dance Division. We do scholarly research, and we work with museums. And that will be my talk today, Dance in Museums, celebrating Core of Culture at 20. Now, I wanted to bring in this because I thought a lot of the people here today would have extensive experience with museums, but maybe not so much. Well, exactly. So I think all of us will be biting our tongues at some point and have a lot to add at another point. But the museum work that we've done is extensive. We've worked with 14 museums around the world, and we're in the permanent collection of 5 museums. This relationship that we have with museums has proved really fruitful. So although it might seem unusual to some of you that dance and museums go together, I hope by the end of this little talk, you'll see what museums can do to help explain the role of dance in cultures where dance is really much more important than it is in our culture. Another thing we can do with museums and that Core of Culture focuses on is the relationship of fine art to dancing, which in some cultures is really integral, such as Tantric Buddhist culture. Really, trust is at the core of what we do. Dancers trust us, monks trust us, funders trust us, and this has been going on for 20 years. We've been invited to do all of our work. In fact, we have more invitations than we can respond to. So it isn't a matter of us forcing ourselves onto any cultures, rather they're asking us, and I think this is because something anybody who works in dancing knows. Dancers, is somebody trying to get in? Let me just check and see if somebody's trying to get in, okay? Because it kind of looks like it. Okay, so we'll just carry on then. Dancers are insiders to one another. Dancers are not outsiders to each other. No matter what the culture, no matter what the context, dancers are insiders to one another. So part of the MO of how we work is dancers helping other dancers. I want to start with telling you our first project, which was in Lama Yuru Monastery in Ladakh. We were invited to come and invited to make a documentary, which wasn't needed. What was needed was something to help the monasteries in Tibet, where the traditions were being systematically eradicated. So the first thing we ever created was a step-by-step glossary on a DVD of how to perform the vocabulary of movement that was smuggled into Tibet to use in the monasteries where the tradition was under threat. So it wasn't a commercial product, it wasn't a performance, it was absolutely a preservation tool. And I want to tell you one more story before we jump into the pictures, because I feel this says a lot about our organization. Less than a year ago, I was in Himachal Pradesh at Tabo Monastery, which is 1,000 years old, founded in 996, and continually for 1,000 years has been performing tantric rituals in their monastery and in their beautiful prayer hall. I met the abbot, and the abbot kind of smiled. And I asked my friend, why is the abbot smiling like that? And the abbot, who spoke English, said, well, most of the abbots outside of Tibet already know who you are. And I said, why do they know who I am? And he answered, because no one knows your name, but we know the logo, and we know that you help monks. And I took that as a great compliment. He went on to ask us if we would please document their 1,000-year-old ritual, because like so many others, there's no record, no documentation at all of these rituals. And now, for the sake of posterity, they're becoming interesting. Here we go. Now, for those of you working in museums, this is the Royal Scottish Museum. And this is before it was renovated. This is a Victorian wrought iron masterpiece in Edinburgh. And have any of you been to this museum by chance? No? Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good, good, good. I want to make sure. Okay. This museum was the Royal Scottish Museum, which became the National Museum of Scotland. Now they won a lottery grant of 42 million pounds. This is what it looks like now. So, you know, all of you working in museums, their ability to transform themselves, their ability to take on different ethos, different manifestos, different programs of performance and presentation. Unlike most other organizations, there is really great adaptability in museums. Now, we were asked by the National Museum of Scotland to help them with an issue they'd had. They had a 100-year-old collection of Buddhist cham costumes. Now here, we are on the opposite side on the railing, overlooking the central space to the other railing on top. So you can see the entire spread of what we did for the Royal Scottish Museum. Starting on the left, you have an orange panel that gives an introduction to Buddhist cham dances. Next to that is a 7-minute video that shows 3 specific characters performing in the cham with historical footage from the British Film Institute and contemporary footage that we had shot. Standing in front of the big mural, which is a mural of a Buddhist cham performance, you see on the left a black hat costume, like a sorcerer's hat. You see in the middle a horned bull god, and on the right, just to the right of the pillar, is a skeleton costume. Going further to the right, you see various photographs on the wall, and there's also text on that wall providing further context. And in the case on the right are implements and instruments. So you see you've got moving image, historical footage, costumes, mural photographs, contextual information, items, and instruments. This is something really a multimedia presentation so unique to a museum. Here is the skeleton and the shinje, the horned bull. They had these costumes for more than 100 years, and it's very interesting how it came to be that Scottish museums were full of Buddhist material, but this was the case. So they weren't quite sure which mask went with which costumes. We helped them with that, and we selected 3 that we could get information and footage of, so very specifically we could show the purpose and role of the black hat sorcerer dance, the purification rites of the bull-headed shinje, and the charnel ground rites of the turdog or the skeletons. So this rather conservative way, conventional way of presenting was nevertheless very thorough. And putting in the footage of historical and contemporary dancing was something really to the heart of what they were trying to do by bringing in a broader context. They have since remodeled this museum and they have kept this exhibit, so we're very happy about that. I'm going to move on now to a project we did with the Honolulu Academy of Arts called The Dragon's Gift, The Sacred Arts of Bhutan. Now, Core of Culture was brought in to do this unprecedented project in the Kingdom of Bhutan. I want to mention something here. I have a little story for each of the different museums I'm going to show you today, and this one is very compelling. It's challenging for art historians, but I'm just going to share the raw truth the way it happened. The Kingdom of Bhutan had turned down 14 museums that wanted to do exhibits on Bhutan, because the king of Bhutan, this would be the 4th king, the last final absolute monarch of Bhutan, believed you cannot tell the story of Bhutan using Western art history. And he wasn't going to let anybody do it. Now, Stephen Little, who used to be at the Art Institute, the director of Chinese art, and did the beautiful Taoism show some years ago, he went to the king of Bhutan and the royal government and said, look, we'll do art conservation and dance preservation if you let us do an exhibit in return. And the king and the royal government came back with, great, but you must include dancing in the exhibition. Now, this didn't make the art historians very happy, but I understood what his concern was. The king's earnest concern regarded the matter of vitality. that successful living Buddhist practice and culture and its importance be reflected in the representation of Buddhist culture. Their fear was legitimate. They feared that if art historians did a show on Tibet, they would show it the same way if art historians did a show on Bhutan, they would do it essentially the same way they do shows on Tibet. Now, they're very sensitive to the fact that in the West, no one did a show on Tibet until Tibet was occupied by the Chinese. The West has never done a show on Tibet while Tibet was a living culture. And so Bhutan was very concerned that they weren't going to do an exhibition on Bhutan that made it look like a dead culture like Tibet. They wanted it to see emphatically that Bhutan was alive and a living culture. And so they wanted dance to be integrated into the display of the exhibition. What you're seeing here is a photo montage by the dance photographer Herbert Migdal, whom we took to Bhutan for 3 weeks. He photographed 67 dancers of the Saint Pema Lingpa's mystical dance tradition. Just quickly to tell you, these are not cut up photos. If you look at any column, choose one column here in this work of art, there were 9 photographs taken in sequence, top to bottom, as the dancer was spinning and dancing. So in fact, each dancer is in one column, and the photographs are taken sequentially in time. So in fact, the photographic montage gives a representation of the dancer moving in time.
Cool.
In terms of how museums responded to this, this was shown in 6 museums, 3 in the United States, including the Rubin, the San Francisco Museum of Asian Art, and the Honolulu Academy of Arts, and 3 in Europe. And in 3 of those 6, it was the highest attendance in the museum's history for the Bhutan show. This is the Honolulu Academy of Arts installation. I want to explain why this is an installation. I'm very fond of this because I think it was highly effective in working with the art. If we look at these 4 screens, on the left-hand side closest to you, that's number 1. On the same wall farther away, number 2. Cross to the right-hand side farther away, that's number 3. And coming back closer to you, number 4. So there's 4 screens, 1, 2, 3, 4. The quintessential act and one of the oldest ritual acts in the world is circumambulation. Well, we really weren't able in a museum setting to have a circumambulation. So we made the screens circumambulate. So the screens would appear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the screens were actually circumambulating around the paintings and around the bench. The paintings, 3 on each side, were selected because of their high dance content. In terms of theme and in terms of visual imagery, they're dance intense. Now you'll notice where we put the single bench, it's in front of the paintings. So if you're sitting on the bench, looking at the paintings, the screens are going around your head, circumambulating. So your eyes are catching the screens as they go over the paintings. The video was 10 minutes long, but there was different content on each screen. Indeed, that makes 40 minutes of content. Now, some museums, like Scotland, every video in the entire museum is the same length. I think that really should probably be better suited to what the actual content is. This was a 10-minute, 40-second video. And we had people sitting down for 10 minutes looking at the art. This is really unusual. Usually people spend 1 or 2 minutes per painting. So the addition of dancing, the circumambulation of the material on the screens, and the correspondence between the imagery in the paintings and the imagery in the dancing could really be spelled out. So the simplicity of this setup, I think, was really one of the best. Now, as you know, museums are all different. This is the San Francisco Museum of Asian Art. They had the 4 screens, but they put different sitting arrangements and included sculptures so that your experience would take in sculpture and dancing and the painting. One of the fundamental aspects of Bhutanese dance is that the dancing are the same characters and figures that you'll see in the painting. And this wasn't really understood because people hadn't looked so carefully at the dancing. So San Francisco rearranged this in a different way to include sculptures and give multiple perspectives. This is the Rubin Museum. Many of you know. The Rubin Museum used to be Barney's, and it has a 7-story obloid spiral staircase going up to a dome in the ceiling. And you can see 2 of the screens here looking up, and there are 2 other screens across from that. So like the installation in Honolulu, it was very much a process where the visitor would walk a circulation to get to the top, while the screens were also circumambulating, making the entire experience one of arrival when you got to the top where the exhibition was held. You can see how the screens were made large and like a continuation of the dome. They're angled, so they actually are made for the people walking up the stairs. This is another shot of the other 2 screens opposite in the Rubin. And this was a very spectacular way of showing the dancing and a dramatic way with the beautiful music. There was 1 score of music and 4 screens set to the 1 score of music with very precise musical cues. So it was really quite a beautiful and uplifting inspiration. This is the Rietberg Museum in Zurich. I don't know how many of you have been to see this beautiful museum. On the top, above ground, is the composer Wagner's house. That is the bulk of the exterior of the Rietberg Museum. And what they did in the Rietberg was to build 5 stories down in the ground to create the addition of the museum. And it's beautiful. It's all just the highest quality materials and architecture. And what they wanted at the very bottom was to have a dedicated chamber where you would see large screens and this wonderful Swiss furniture, and you could sit and watch for 10 minutes and see these 4 screens circulating to the beautiful music. But again, it's like an installation because you have to go down and then you experience the dancing, and then you go through the exhibit again on your way out. So the beauty of the show was the integration of the dance media with the fine art in an experiential installation-like way that would enhance the correspondences between the art and the dancing. I'm going to move on now to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where we've done a number of projects, but this was a very special project created by Robert Ho Foundation when the Robert Ho Foundation gave the gift of a gallery of Buddhist art. Robert Ho wanted to celebrate the gift, and he did it in an extravagant fashion. He's a friend of mine. He was very happy with the work in Bhutan, and in fact, the Ho Foundation underwrote our work in Bhutan. He called me and said, Joseph, we want to have some Buddhist dances for the opening of this gallery in London. And I said, great, which Buddhist dances do you want? And he said, well, all of them. And I thought, well, I don't think we can do all of them. When is this? And he said, well, it's in 8 months. I was like, it's in 8 months and you want all of it. So we went back to John Clark and we went back to the exhibit and the gallery, and we saw that one of its emphases was to show all of the different schools of Buddhism, meaning Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. And so we proceeded to get dance traditions reflecting each of the different schools of Buddhism, which meant Japanese no plays. It meant Himalayan monks and nuns. It meant a Nepalese 35th generation Tantric Buddhist priest. And it meant Sri Lankan folk performers. Now, what you're seeing here is the Raphael room of the V&A. The only thing in this room are 8 enormous cartoons for Raphael's tapestries in the Sistine Chapel. They belong to the Queen personally, so you have to get the Queen's permission to do anything here. We got the okay to do the no play, and then I told Robert, well, you know, they need a no stage to do a no play, just like a Greek tragedy goes on a Greek amphitheater. A no play goes on a very specific kind of stage called a no stage. And Robert said, well, all right, how should we do that? And so I got the blueprints for how to do a legit spec no stage. It turned out that Robert Hoe was having his cabinets remade in his house in London. And they were being remade by the furniture makers for the House of Lords. Now, the furniture makers for the House of Lords sounds very fancy, but these are just good old boys, blue collar guys that really know how to do woodwork. So Robert Hoe asked if they would consider making the no stage, these furniture makers. And they took it with gusto. And so they made this beautiful no stage to spec. And it was like a huge piece of furniture. This was not slapped together for a performance. It was created like a beautiful work of art, like a beautiful piece of finished furniture, a Japanese no stage to spec. After the event was over, we gave the no stage to Reading University, where it's been used for 10 years to teach people Japanese performing arts. You can see here how beautifully it came out. This is the no actor Mikata Shizuka. The mask is beautiful, the costumes are beautiful, the acting is perfect, and this beautiful finished no stage to show the gradations of movement. Look at this exquisite photograph. The no stage with the no play with the Raphaels in the background. One of the things that this did was used a highly respectful context, the Raphael room at the Victorian Albert Museum. There was limited seating. We created the seating so that it would be like a no play, and it would be like a monastery, and it would be like a Sri Lankan folk altar. So if you came here, you would experience something very similar to what you would experience at a no play or at a Nepalese altar. And we had the freedom to say no telephones of any kind, no recording of any kind. We had the ability to introduce people to these arts and give them some pointers on how to look at what they were seeing, to tell them, don't applaud at the end. You're gonna want to applaud, but don't. Take that moment and do something else with it. Try to expand your understanding. We'll give you a chance to applaud later. But I think that this beautiful photograph shows how well cultures can meet. And when you meet the dancing with respect, you see it in a more respectful way. And I think this is coming together of civilizations at a very high level. No play in front of a Raphael painting is really civilization at its best. Now, on the other end, the Raphael room, if you've never been there, is this huge barrel vaulted room, really, really big hall. And it's got 4 paintings on one side, 4 paintings on the other side. The only other object in that hall, you look, is a medieval altar. And that's what's behind the Sri Lankan altar that we built just for this day. So at one end of the hall was a no stage. At the other end of the hall was a Sri Lankan folk altar, banana plants folded at the bottom with the printed fabric coming direct from Sri Lanka. So we created the Sri Lankan folk altar, and for that we were able to show the ritual that went with the Sri Lankans. Now, just a bit of a word on dancing in Theravada Buddhism. We all know that Buddhist monks in Tibet dance. That's Vajrayana Buddhism. We all know that these Zen moments of the no play and the salvation is the Mahayana Buddhism in the no plays. But in Theravada Buddhism, which is the oldest form of Buddhism, most of the arts are considered a bit hedonistic. And so the monks don't dance, but in Theravada Buddhism, dancing is considered like incense or fruit or flowers. It's an offering. Well, if you're going to offer flowers, you're going to offer the most beautiful flowers you have. So ironically, by eschewing dancing by the monks in Sri Lanka, the dancing in Sri Lanka is really outrageous. And here's the ritual that leads up to the Sri Lankans dancing. And here's the Vajrayana nuns from Ladakh and Tibet are helping with this ritual by bringing the offerings, which are what a new monk needs: a robe, a begging bowl, and a razor to shave his head. So that's within those packages. So the nuns are delivering the packages, and the Sri Lankan dancers with their tambourines are here at the V&A dancing in front of this altar. The dance they're doing is called the Suvisi Vivaranaya. And it actually is a dance that with the Ho Foundation, we helped revive and save from extinction. And now it's being performed fully once again. This ritual actually goes on for 11 hours of dancing nonstop. So while we wanted to show the real dances, full no plays and full rituals, what we did in the terms of the Sri Lankans was they danced for 3 hours without stopping in the middle of a 10-hour day that began with the no play and ended with the no play and featured performances by the 4 groups I mentioned. Just to give you an idea, this is the dancer doing a forward flip in midair in front of the altar. And this is, you don't see Tibetan monks doing that. So it's really a beautiful ability we had in this museum to show a real no play as a real no play and let people taste that sensibility, to take people to a Sri Lankan folk altar with Sri Lankan folk family dancing and to experience the full and long-lasting 3 hours of dancing. By the end, it was quite hot and sweaty in there, but it was a different kind of spiritual experience. These are the nuns, and the nuns also use the Sri Lankan altar as the backdrop. The nuns here are performing a chud ritual. Now, chud is very interesting because it's a ritual in which you psychically dismember yourself. And it's a very rare thing to see done, but we didn't want to bring in proscenium, show-ready things. We wanted to bring in real ritual experience for the people. The nuns did 2 performances. They danced and they performed this complex chud ritual that has different implements, horns, bells, drums, and a whole series of flowing hand gestures called mudra. This is someone you know, I think some of you, Prajwal Vajracharya. He is a 35th generation tantric Buddhist priest from Kathmandu. This tradition of dancing that Prajwal does is distinct from the Tibetans and the Ladakhis, but it is still Vajrayana Buddhism. But it is a distinct dancing tradition where the dancers actually take on the attributes of the deities that they are embodying. Here, Prajwal is performing Vajrapani. Now, Prajwal is very interesting because in some ways, like the king of Bhutan, he has concerns about the way Buddhism is represented. I was talking to Prajwal a couple of months ago, and I said, Prajwal, I was just on the phone with 2 ritual specialists. And Prajwal said, there aren't any. And I said, what do you mean? And he went on. But what he was saying was important. He was saying, Buddhism is not art, and Buddhism is not architecture, and Buddhism is not books. Buddhism is transmitted, disciplined practices. And coming from a 35th generation priest who is keeping alive these traditions more than 700 years old that were transmitted to him by his father and kept secret. His father told him, you must take these public to the world. I think his view on what Buddhism is, that Buddhism is transmitted spiritual practices, that's what Buddhism is an important message to hear when we hear all of the other fascinating things about Buddhist art and Buddhist architecture. One of the things we were really able to do, this is Prajwal again, dancing Vajra Yogini, one of the most important figures in Buddhist meditation practices. But by working in and with museums and inviting people carefully into what they're seeing, you can't just drop kick an audience into something they've never seen before and ask them to make sense of it with 140 words on the wall. That just doesn't give them enough. But at the V&A, we were able to invite them in, tell them how special it was, ban phones, create the seating arrangement to match the performing situation, and ask them to step out of their normal museum habits, but build on the type of etiquette you have in museums. People go to museums to concentrate, to mull, to think, to study, to enjoy, and to take that quality of how people behave in museums anyway and say, we're gonna go a little further. Today we're going to try to taste what it's like to see a ritual dance that isn't a theatrical dance. Everybody was thrilled with it. It was completely sold out. Some people stayed the entire 10 hours and saw every single dance. So it was really a delightful project and almost kingly to be able to do something like this, which to our knowledge had never been done in the history of Buddhism, to bring all of these from the different types of Buddhism together. But above all, in the museum setting, it allowed us to explore the cultural relationship between physical embodiment and fine art. And you see that it's not strained, it's direct. And this is something we don't have in our culture. So for people to understand that these beautiful paintings are integrally tied to embodied practices to assist the practitioner, usually in a visualization effort, is really a remarkable thing we were able to do for dancing that could really only be done at this level of concentration in a museum. I'm going to share a couple of commissions that Core of Culture received that I did with my great colleague, Liz Cadera. I don't know if any of you know Liz, but recently she has done the overhaul of the Oriental Institute down at the University of Chicago, which is a big charge. So I encourage all of you, when we can get out again, to get down to the OI at the University of Chicago and see Elizabeth's beautiful work. She's done a lot of important projects, such as the 9/11 Museum in New York, and she's worked together with me for more than 10 years now. The Beijing Dance Academy, which is the top academy for dancing in Beijing, commissioned us to create an exhibition that would be used at a competition. And they had very strict criteria. It had to be portable, it had to be movable. But what was interesting too was this. Now, listen to the words. They wanted an exhibition on the history and culture of world ballet. And we thought, well, do you mean the world history and culture of ballet? And they're like, no, we mean the history and culture of world ballet. So we asked them, well, what do you mean by world ballet? And their thrust was, ballet is no longer a Western art. Ballet is now a global art, and China is leading it. So in our design, ultimately, if you look on the left, you see large, big, beautiful images of important moments of dance history in the West. And on the right was dance as it went around the world. Panama, China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, all of the places where ballet was integrated into other cultures. Along the bottom, you see a strip, and this is dance notation as it evolved through the centuries and cultures. And dotted through it like musical notes are screens that show a variety of important threshold, game-changing ballets. So this beautiful design was something we created that allowed us also to experiment with ideas that we have been using ever since. This was a way we could use it to allow the winners of the competition to be introduced. And also to create an immersive environment with means that could be suited to places outside of a museum context to still give an exhibition-like, expo-like situation. We got another commission from the Arts Council of Mongolia and the Bodkan Palace Museum in Ulaanbaatar. This commission was to create a dance exhibition that would look at the three main thrusts of dancing in Mongolia. You see in this diagram, in the forecourt where you have a gate, you see green crystal-like installations. And in these green crystal-like installations, there would be projections and content reflecting the indigenous and nomadic contributions to dance in Mongolia. Going back into the compound itself, you see light blue circles and domes. These circles inside the sanctuary of the temple palace are the Buddhist contributions to dance in Mongolia. And if you look on the right side, outside of the temple complex, you see orange triangles. Well, since the Soviet Union, classical ballet has a complete foothold in the dance scene in Mongolia. So we were able to create an exhibition that had nomadic dancing influence in the front, in the courtyard, had the Buddhist influence in the middle, in the sanctuary, and had the balletic foreign influence outside in the garden. This is just an example of projections, how it could be used in the central Buddhist area of the forecourt. This is just an example of how you could show the classical ballet in garden installations outdoors. So once again, with things like this, like with the downtown fountains, you're doing art that has to be waterproof and weatherproof. And I want to close this little talk with something, an exhibit we did at the Museo di Arte e Cultura Orientale in Arcidosho, Italy, which is in Tuscany, a place I've worked for the last several years. And in this exhibit, we were able to do something I feel very proud of. In these other exhibits, we were brought on to help explain art, to help show a full cultural context, to show national trends of dance involvement. But in this show, we were able to really take a dance topic, and not an easy one, and explore it. And that dance topic that we explored was visionary dance in Buddhism. And what we mean by visionary dance in Buddhism is that in Buddhist tradition, going back 1,200 years, yogis or high lamas, meditation masters, would have yogic visions. In these visions, these yogic masters were taught dancing. I think this is very interesting. They didn't just see dancing, they were taught dancing. They were taught dancing in visions, and then they came down and taught people these dances. And these dances have lasted 600 years, 300 years, 400 years. These dances have lasted and lasted. And quite amazingly, in the 20th century, the Dzogchen master, Namkhai Norbu, who died last year, had visionary dances created, 3 sets of dances that he created for his Dzogchen practitioners, male and female. So the tradition of visionary dance in Buddhism is not just an antique tradition. It actually is something that's happening now. So the first half of the exhibit, this is a landscape photograph. You see on the left-hand side a large mural of Samye Monastery, the first Buddhist monastery in Tibet, which is a circle on the ground in the middle of that panorama. And something you see also on the left-hand side, and this is something I've never seen in any other exhibit. Normally at a museum, you will see a very prescribed amount of writing to go with the painting. 140 words, a paragraph, whatever it is, and then there'll be a catalog that's usually expensive. And the catalog will have essays. And the essays may or may not be directly related to the research that went into the show. It depends. So what we felt, because we researched so extensively, we felt that we didn't want to just show dancing, we wanted to show the research. So on the walls throughout this research is writing by lamas, Western scholars, anthropologists. We've shared the scholarship with the museum goers for the same reason you share the dancing or the teachings by a high master. This is the opportunity to share with people. Otherwise, they'll never see these dances. Otherwise, they'll never experience this great scholarship. So I think one of the things we did here was to include whole sections of writing to show the scholarship and the variety of kinds of scholarship, the kinds of writing. Buddhist masters don't write like Western anthropologists. They're completely different minds and completely different types of writing. So you've got some representation of dance documentation. You have a costume. You've got beautiful masks in the 8 manifestations of Guru Rinpoche, showing the dances of Buddhism's tradition. Now I want to show and end here with something that was really the trickiest thing of all that I'm very happy about. This is a drawing, a rendering as we were working on it, but the goal was this. How do you show in a museum exhibit visions received in a dance? Not an easy topic. So we really thought about it, Liz Kadera, myself, and the museum director, Alex Sidlecki. And what you see here, you see that slice of pie on the wall in the back that has a design on it? That is what actually the holy man saw in his vision. He's a mathematician. So all he needed to see was that slice of pie, and he knew the entire mandala that you see on the floor. Now that mandala on the floor was received in the vision, and the dancers dance on it, 8 men and 8 women doing different choreography. You see here, not to scale, a little video toward the center on the left. That is Namkhai Norbu explaining his visions that he had over 2 years of time in the 1990s. So we have the geometrical vision. We have him describing 2 years of his dance visions. The painting you see is a painting that Namkhai Norbu did of the deity who gave him the mandala. And next to that is the costumes that came in the vision. That's actually a page of his notebook, and where these dances are performed around the world. But here was the final solution, and this is what I want to share with you. It's one of those little, a geek thrill, you might say, but we were so delighted to be able to bring this perspective and dimension to people. The dancers that were done by the Dzogchen practitioners on top of the mandala were filmed from above on a white background. So it was as if you're looking down upon the mandala and over the heads of the dancers. So the mandala is on the wall like the slice of pie. The mandala is also draped over the globe, which is also a projecting device. The globe projects onto the flat surface of the cylinder a video of the dancers shot from the top. But here's the kicker. It's those 2 little steps. You have to walk up the 2 steps to look down upon the dancers. And it really seems like you're in midair looking at dancers dancing in midair. And so this was really a collaborative effort and a wonderful solution to help bring people into this mystical reality of dances received in a vision. I want to close with this simple 180-degree photograph of the Namkhai Norbu section of the project, the Museo di Arte e Cultura Orientale in Italy. I hope you've enjoyed some of these slides and they've made you think some new ideas about the possibilities of dance in museums. And thank you for helping me celebrate Core of Culture at 20.
Okay, how do we get there? We all are. Joseph, thank you, my dear, dear friend.
Bravo.
Wow. That
You're
was
welcome.
fun.
Thank you. I enjoyed doing that. Madhu, thank you for the advice.
No, it was great fun. I was wondering how it was going to come out, but it was nice to see the progression and then finishing up with almost 3D.
Yeah. Almost, we're getting there.
Getting there.
Would it be possible to see the video of the dancers on the mandala? Do you have a clip of that you can put on your screen and share with us?
I wouldn't do it right now, but I'm happy to send it to you. I recently published, we recently published on this exhibit. It opened last September, and it's in a little Tuscan village, so you gotta get there.
Tuscan village, what town is it in?
Arcidoso. It's about 45 minutes from Florence. But once the coronavirus hit in March, you know, it really stopped people from going. So the show's been extended over, and we put a little bit online. So Betty, I'm happy to send some links to you.
Great.
And share
Well,
this.
send it to all of us. I'll get
Yeah,
you
I'll send it to everybody.
the addresses.
Great.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have Prajwal speak about, you know, the very important point that you and he are making, which is that, you know, this is part of a practice that is handed down by one's teacher to the initiate. And, you know, I mean, it's a very big problem in the way we perceive Buddhism and Buddhist art. And I think that, especially because he is one of those rare people who can talk to it.
No, I agree with you, and I'm working on a new project around Tabo with a wonderful scholar, Donald Lopez from University of Michigan. And it was funny because Donald went to India and found a bit of rare scripture that would help our project. So he called me and said, I found this bit of scripture that will help us out. Tell your monk on the ground, Tinless. So I call my monk on the ground. What does he do? He gets on his motorcycle and drives to Varanasi. Okay? And Donald writes back, no need to do that. Go to BuddhistScriptureOnline.com, and you can find it. And Tinless comes back with, the internet doesn't work in Ladakh. How am I going to do that? But more than that, to your point, Madhu, is these completely different notions, even of the scholarship. All right, Western scholars are sending emails and texts and digital things, and it's all very convenient. Tinless wanted to hold the sacred books in the sacred place where his teachers were and his buddies were. And if he had a question, he could go to a High Lama. And he's like, I know that. If I'm going to go look at a sacred bit of writing, I'm going to go find it in a sacred place. And I think that one of the things now we want to explore in this project is how do you get the Prajwals and the Tinlesses and the Don Lopezes all in one room?
And in a way, you almost can't. I mean, Don at least is old school enough that perhaps one could try. But the way in which Western art history has shifted, it's not about those things anymore. So I think that over time, there's going to be a real divide between art history and where it's going and religious art, which essentially is not just art, it's part of a religious tradition where you have different representations of the art.
Absolutely.
It's part of a practice. It's a living practice.
It's true.
It's not about perceiving it on 2D.
Right, and I'll tell you, we took the step, and we'll find out how wise it was, but we wanted to get the best person we could get from art to work on this project, so we invited Christian Luxantis, who was maybe the best tantric expert in Europe. And I love Christian because he's really old school. I mean, he's really modern pestle, and he's a great, great scholar. And when I first told him what we wanted to do, the Vajradhatu ritual is performed in Tabo, and the prayer hall at Tabo is a 3-dimensional mandala. So it's a mandala in 3D, and the monks sit in the middle of it and do the ritual. And Christian said flat out, well, there's just no relationship between the ritual and the art. I don't know how you're going to find anything. I'm like, they sit in the middle of the art and do it. And he thought, you'll never find a relationship. There's no relationship. So in a lot of ways, he's the perfect guy to do this with. And they've both been real angels, and they're struggling, and not as universities are struggling now. But they've both been really great. So Madhu, we hope that we can make some headway, and if not, at least show the full life of these scriptures as they are lived by scholars in one place and practitioners in another.
I have a question, or I don't know if many people have read his work. You have an extensive writing history for the Ballet Review and everything else. He writes like a dream. And I loved one of them where you completely eviscerated that tourism is killing Buddhism, that they moved up dance from the winter to the summer to accommodate tourists.
Oh, that's Ladakh. I mean, what's the big festival that is so ugly at this point, Shoma? it was moved to summer. The
You wrote about
costumes
that.
are terrible.
Yeah, it's all for tourism. Yeah. Mhm.
And I think you call them photo terrorists. You're very funny.
Well, you got a good memory. I've got a fan in you.
I-
Hi, Shoma. It's nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a while.
like to see you too.
But it was what Shoma brings up. I was the first time, what's the big tourist? Yeah.
Emmis.
And, you know, it was interesting. And then I was back a few years later, and it was winter. It was the ritual and the dance for everybody. The richness was, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Totally different, Shoma.
But it's all going to go that, you know, the Guizhou way, because unfortunately, Ladakh now is under the administration of the federal government, and they're one of the few ways that they can think of to, and this is what the Ladakhis themselves claim that they want. They all want development with a big D, and the key factor of development is going to be tourism. A lot of Ladakhis, including some really smart people, are talking about the fragility of the environment there, which cannot really handle tourists. But nobody's listening to those few voices, because the rest of the people who in fact have supported the BJP government are in fact wanting development, because it's like what happened in the rest of the hills, you know, in Himachal, in Uttarakhand, which is that the local lobbies who want hotels and development, they want the tourists. So it's just a matter of time that Ladakh is going to go the way, you know, that sadly Guizhou has gone in China, because any of these so-called protected areas are going to go that way. So which is why the work that Core of Culture does now is even more important, because it's literally going in there before people are forgetting what those traditions used to be about.
The
Start
religious,
again. I just unmuted. Go ahead.
is there any distinction between the religious authorities and the commercial authorities, the civil authorities? Is there any, because I don't see why the religious, at this instance, authority couldn't impose some type of stability, some type of integrity that would keep it, hold it the way that it was meant to be, rather than becoming a commercial experience, enterprise.
That's a very, very good question. And I think you're also going to the fact that you go back a little further, and the monasteries were also these social batteries. You know what I mean? It used to be every family sent one boy to the monastery. And that, it took me a while before I realized, like, everybody's related here. The monks are related to the people watching it. This is a huge communal thing. And so that's changing a bit, and you can't require a boy anymore. So they get their young monks from a different place. But very interestingly, in Tabo, which is right next to the border with China, and it is a very remote and rough place, but they still are cultivating it, that because it's a 10th century UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Archaeological Survey of India has control of the site because they're bolstering it against earthquakes and repairing it and restoring it. So the abbot does not have the ability to say no tourists. In other places, they do have this power, and some monasteries like Tikse closes off. Lama Yuwu built a hotel. So there is a difference between, and I'm wondering what the impact of this coronavirus is going to be on tourism. I hope it brings it down and changes it. But I think more and more, you're going to see these tensions, and hopefully more monks and monasteries will take that position of protecting their rituals and rites. So
but that's, I mean, they may succeed in India, they're not going to succeed in China.
No, that's true.
I mean, in fact, as you know, to a great extent, what you're saying is possible, because, you know, we can work with the monasteries, they can, you know, work with the ASI, they can control it to a certain extent if they, at the local level, they want to. But if you see what's happened in different ethnic regions of China, in China, that's not going to be possible. In fact, it's the Chinese who are the ones who are going to many of these festivals. I mean, the Han Chinese who are going to these festivals in the different autonomous regions and creating the, the excitement. I remember in my college days, there was this Han Chinese girl who loved to go to different sites and dress up in the local costume. It's like a really something that they do. They during the New Year holiday or other family holidays, they go to these different areas, they dress up in the local stuff and take pictures. And it's that type of tourism that really is quite dangerous, I think, because of the numbers. It's because they can't control the numbers anymore.
I've got pictures of that from Guizhou where you could rent the costumes. And the other interesting thing that I found is one of the dangers is almost from within, which is the why can't I pronounce that word?
Devaluation.
Thank you. But of one's own culture. And one of the wonderful things, Joseph, when you did the film Dressing Ladakh, is aunt and niece were putting on the authentic dress. And the niece got across because she came to Chicago, didn't she, Madhu? We had her. Is that her generation is beginning to value the culture. Bollywood, television, you name it, brought in a different aesthetic and made the Ladakhis feel that their culture wasn't as good as other cultures. And that was sad.
Well, in a way, maybe, I don't know, the Ladakhis feel that separating from Kashmir now means that they will be able to focus on their culture as opposed to this Jammu and Kashmir culture, because they felt that they were getting sucked into the culture of the greater province. But this is not just a Ladakh issue. This is the same in the Northeast. This is the same in, those areas of Northeast Thailand, going into the hills, going up to Yunnan, going up to China. I mean, this is something we are seeing all across the belt.
When we were working in Bhutan, I'll make the story short. We went to a reception with the Prime Minister, and there were several projects at the reception. I ended up at a small table with Dianne Feinstein's husband, me, Stephen Little, and the Prime Minister of Bhutan. And there was a lull in the conversation. And Dianne Feinstein's husband says, "Oh, that rap. It's just disgusting. It's absolutely horrible. I don't even know what they're saying, but it's just disgusting." And Steve Little says to me, down boy, okay? And of course, the Prime Minister of Bhutan says, "Why do your singers sing disgusting songs?" And I was ready to pounce. And I said, "Your Excellence, rap singers sing about their environments. If there's police brutality, they sing about police brutality. If there's drug addiction, they sing about drug addiction. Why does your country have police brutality and drug addiction? Take it away, Mr. Feinstein." Okay, his name's not Feinstein, it's something else, Christian. But I had to tell them this story. We were working in Ura, which is remote Bhutan. There was no running water, no electricity. It was a really remote, simple town. We were there before they really opened everything up in the absolute monarchy. And we thought, well, you know what? They're just beginning to bring in tourists. We'll get some of the teenage boys to learn how to say, "Why don't you stand over here? This is what you say to somebody," how to explain what's going on so they don't invade it. And so we went to Ura, and it was our day of training with the teenage boys. So there were 7 or 8 teenage boys standing there, like looking at us, like waiting for us to say something. So I looked at them and I noticed they all had their pants pulled down really low. Okay. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, you guys are hip hop, right? And they're like, yeah, yeah, we're hip hop. I'm like, wow, you guys are hip hop. Cool. Well, who's your favorite hip hop artist? Maybe I have some in my computer. I said, we like Eminem. Great. What's your favorite Eminem song? We've never heard any of his music. We don't have electricity. We don't have computers. We don't have. But the point is, how did 12-year-old boys in Aura get so impacted by hip hop culture that having not heard any of the music, they felt if they pulled their pants down, they were hip hop. And I'm like, you can't ignore the power of these trends.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying, Madhu, is really about the inevitable rush and why Core of Culture is working against the clock to get some of these things recorded. And lately, we've had a number of abbots ask us, please record the rituals, which is different than the dancing. You know, dancing sexier, it's funner, it's more colorful, moves around. Rituals are harder to make interesting in a video, you know, in a documentation. But then we learned these rituals that have gone on for 1,000 years have no documentation at all. That's how strong the oral tradition has been. There's no record. And they're like, please make a record because we don't have one. And so it's very interesting what you're saying. We're finding it borne out again and again.
But you know, I also think it's an important question. Have I unmuted?
No, you're on.
No, we hear you.
Yeah, I mean, who are we to decide whether they should change or not change? If they want change, then they should change. I mean, it's lovely for us to be, you know, tourists and go and see things, quote unquote, unspoiled and traditional and the way it used to be. But maybe they don't want things the way they used to be. I mean, I don't want to live the way my grandmother or my great grandmother lived. So there's that side of the question too. Just because we like it unspoiled and the same, I would imagine that there is a section of their population that wants the heating and the air conditioning and Amazon deliveries and the internet. And if they want it, they should have it.
I think you're right. And you absolutely have got a point about that. You don't want to romanticize, you know, no electricity. You know, it's not romantic. But I think the issue is more, and you know, we used to say it sort of jokingly when we were working in Bhutan, you take a pretty girl and put her on a car, teenage boys want cars. You take a pretty girl and put her with a watch, teenage boys want watches. And so there's a way of getting who you're trying to get. And we as a culture are even better at getting who we're trying to get than we were before. So it's sort of giving them a fair shake, I think, to create the future in their own model, to create the kind of future they want. And I think we see that more in Bhutan, where Bhutan, even in its constitution, dancing is enshrined in its constitution. As far as we know, the only constitution in the world with dance in it. But I think there's a place where they're really trying to bring it all together. And you can understand why people like the King of Bhutan are saying it's important to show vital contemporary expression of Buddhism when you're showing the 800-year-old art, because Buddhism is this living thing right now. It's not some ancient thing. And to at least show the living practice of Buddhism. So I think there's a flip side to that, to show the practical side of it from the practice point of view. But it's a good point.
I think though the Bhutan example and what's happening, say in Ladakh, are two kind of different models, simply because Bhutan still is a monarchy where the monarch can dictate a lot of things, while what you're having in Ladakh is some form of democracy, because these are the democratic representatives who they're electing, who are then representing, say, the BJP, who are then in parliament, and it's their decision how they want to move their state forward. So I think that what's going to be interesting is, in a democracy, If people want one thing and not the other, then it's going to be a different experiment from Tibet. It's going to be a different experiment from Bhutan.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right.
I think Tabo to a great extent can be saved because it's so cut off.
Mm. Yeah, I think they'd get a better shot for a while. Something happened interesting at Tabo too. They built a couple little guest houses in Tabo. And then they improved the road, and the road to Tabo was really treacherous. They improved the road. Well, because they improved the road, nobody stays at Tabo. They can drive on to Kaza. So actually, the improvement in the road takes everybody out of Tabo, takes them up to Kaza. So it's very funny, these kinds of things too. Jack, were you going to say something? Alan, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, this all reminds me of something my grandpa Leo said to me. He said he was a farmer, and he would talk to me when we were out in the fields, and he would say, one day he said, you are the epitome of your progeny. He said, I look at you and I see my daughter who has passed me on to you, and I just wonder what you're going to do. And I mean, I still, when I think of that, I get emotional because I can't see any young person building something out of a cultural context that would have any meaning except the immediacy of the present, which to me is ephemeral. I just cannot imagine even who we are today as a culture, is a process, a long, complicated, beautiful, difficult process and an evolution that gives what we do meaning. I just can't imagine. There was some place, someone told me the story too, of a city in, I think, Kazakhstan, that they just built up. They just made it like a temple. And everybody who has been there said it has such an unreal feeling that they saw it and they just wanted to leave and to get back to the poor, the cities, the other, but the real cultural places, this is where life goes on.
It sounds like Ashgabat.
Ashgabat, yes, I think that.
You took the words out of my mouth, Barbara. I was going to say the same thing. I think you mean Turkmenistan.
Right.
Yeah, Turkmenistan, not Kazakhstan.
It is the most bizarre place I have ever been in my life.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Yeah.
And it's a show place in the most I couldn't wait to get out of there.
No, but it's also fun to see. It is.
I would have missed it.
Because it really is worth seeing, because you've got this city in the middle of nowhere, built out of marble that has been brought from Italy, not even like local marble or Turkish marble, and it's a sight to behold. No people, very few people, but and
these white buildings with windows that are kind of either mirrored blue or mirrored gray, and you feel you're being looked at. It's something out of a future tense movie. And then at night, the amount of neon racing up and down these buildings. There's one with horses. They're amazing.
But I think there's the other side too. I thanks to Barbara, I went to Tibet a couple of years ago with the former military attaché to China. I took a small group, so we got to go into all the forbidden lands, and I saw 12 different dance festivals in the course of about 4.5 weeks. And it was right at the time. So Madhu, we saw a lot of what you were talking about, the Han Chinese going there. But what was interesting was I'm a dance specialist. And so I could look at these beautifully costumed, because now the Chinese are worried they're not going to get into heaven. So they're gilding the roofs of these temples. They're putting in big new statues. They're buying all new costumes. So these monasteries look so wealthy and gorgeous. They don't look run down at all. But then the dancing comes out and it's like, this looks like stick figure dancing. It doesn't look like real dancing, like dancing moves, you know, it didn't look right. And I didn't want to tell my hosts, like, oh, you know, I've seen better dancing in a mud village in Bhutan, you know? But it was because for several reasons I learned sometimes they were in fact hiding it from the Chinese because everything is surveillance in China. And they're like, so we never do our dances correctly in public. And you will find this sometimes in ancient places, like UNESCO will come and they do the dance wrong because they don't want UNESCO to have a record of it, you know? So sometimes you see that. Other places, the Chinese are very clever. They let a boy go to a monastery for a year, then they take him out for 2 years, then they put him back for a year, then they take him out. Well, you can't learn how to learn these sacred traditions, especially dancing, if they're pulling you in and taking you out and putting you in 4 different schools. So the Chinese are well aware of old traditions and they know how to mess them up. They know how to trip them up. But in the course of all this, my monk on the motorcycle, Tinless Dorji, he's actually a former monk who got a PhD in Buddhist ritual. So he's absolutely my ace in the hole. He's really helpful. Part of our new project is looking at mudra, looking at the hand gestures in the rituals, because it might be that over 1,000 years, the only thing that didn't change was the hand gesture. Because certainly the way Sanskrit sounds is not the way Chinese sounds, not the way Indonesian sounds. So if there's integrity in the sound of the voice, that's not going to carry from culture to culture. And the cultures are going to change them and modify them. So part of what we were interested in was, well, what integrity is there in the practice of the mudra in these rituals? Well, they've all got WhatsApp. And what I've learned is you can set this monk body on fire and get answers. And now they all know me. They all know Core of Culture. Everybody wants to help Tabo. So we are getting videos sent from Tibet and audio sent from Taiwan. And these monks are using all these modern means. There's a lot of monks who love being monks and love the brotherhood of monks. And they're all in touch with each other. And it's very interesting to see this other whole world of communication and interest and transportation and how they carry a message from one to another. It seems ancient, but they're using modern means to do it. And so, yes, I will always contact my Western scholars for information, but I always set the monk network on fire because they will always come back, and often overnight, with something that they ran in and filmed and gave back to you. So I think, Alan, to some of your questions is, they're using some of the new technologies for their own ends as well, to preserve their culture, which I think is part of what we're doing. We use new technologies, archiving means, to save their technology too.
Although
Joseph.
I would think that this sharing or this network of communication and visuals will ultimately change the history because they're going to be cross-fertilized. I mean, they're going to be modified. Nothing is static. As Micah was pointing out, really, these are all, I'm sure, I can't prove, of course, a continuum, that there, if one went back 600 years, you would, or 1,000 years, that some of these rituals would look exactly the same way as they did. Their influences, and now with this communication process, I would think that that process would be actually accelerated. You know, I have to, when you were talking about the Chinese actually doing rituals or doing performances, but modifying them for public use, and they have a great history of hiding the reality from, especially from Westerners. I remember the stories about the Dowager Empress Cixi, who, when she invited the wives of the Western diplomats into the Forbidden City to visit with her, she'd have all of her furniture changed and all the art changed because she didn't want them to see the real room that she actually occupied.
That's just what he was saying.
And they did and that was routinely done. including the kind of jewelry she was wearing or the kind of robe she was wearing. But all of the furniture was changed. All of the art was changed. She didn't want those Westerners to really see
The real
the
thing.
real thing.
Yeah.
I have a question, Madhu or Joseph, but isn't it true historically, outsiders have influenced Buddhism all the time? Initially, there's no art in Buddhism. When the Alexander came in with the Apollo cults, it affected the Buddhists to make sculptures so they could compete with the Buddhists. Isn't that right, though? That's why you see the Greek influences. It's constantly affected anyway. What is the original
It's
anyway?
not correct at all. That was promoted by Western scholars, especially a strand of Western scholarship in the colonial period, but that's not correct because, in fact, what is Buddhist art? It's actually art that was started from the time of Ashoka. Well, actually, it goes right back to the oldest stupas that were created on top of the remains of the Buddha. And then from the time of Ashoka, from the 3rd century BC, and we've discussed this before, all of the sites that he then found where there were relics, he then redistributed the relics and created additional stupas and monuments. And from then on, every region that has that Buddhism spread into has its own art that they represented on the walls of these monasteries or stupas or whatever they built. So the art has evolved based on geography. So in the Gandharan region, which is where you have the slightly more Greek influenced decorations for these monasteries, what you're not then looking at is not just the Greek influence, but the Roman influence, the Iranian influence, the Scythian influence, the Indian influence, which is also on the same monastery sometimes. So depending on wherever Buddhism went, the local people adorned those structures with their own style. But the thing about Buddhism is that its root from India was always protected. So the texts always went from India to wherever it was. And based on then whichever area became the repository of that type of Buddhism, then monks would go back to the source. So for example, for Tibet or for the northern lands, they would come to Eastern India, to the universities of Nalanda and Vikramashila and all of these other places to study. And similarly, for Southeast Asia or for Sri Lanka, Burma, they would again come to Eastern India or go to other universities. And it didn't matter where they were, whether they were in mainland China, whether they were in Central Asia, whether they were in Burma, or whether they were in Thailand or Indonesia. The source was the same, and which is why, unfortunately, when Buddhism was removed in India, when Buddhism died in India, we actually know the texts, the original texts, because they were saved in other languages. In most cases, the original texts in India are lost. So we've had to recreate Buddhist texts on the basis of Sanskrit texts and other language texts that were copies from the Sanskrit that have been preserved, for example, in many Chinese monasteries, particularly the ones in Central Asia, since the Central Asian climate helped protect so many. But this is the case for every Buddhist land. But the art that would adorn the building would always be local. Yeah, but the source of it, so the Vajradhatu, for example, that Joseph is talking about, the source of that is still India, is still Eastern India, because that's the source of Vajrayana, is Eastern India.
I guess what I was thinking was Buddhist art has very little to do with Buddhism, because isn't Buddhist not supposed to be visual anyway? Most of the original Buddhist paintings didn't represent Buddha at all.
No, that is also not correct, because it was just that early Buddhism didn't represent the Buddha, but that was because the Buddha was not important, because he had become extinct. You know, when he passed away into Nirvana, the Buddha was never to be venerated as a god. He was not a god. He was an exemplar. But that was just early Buddhism. But very soon, from 1st century BC, you have the image of the Buddha, besides the whole Bodhisattva cult. So, I mean, 1st century BC is still pretty early on. I mean, it's not exactly that late. And it's just that the form of Buddhism changed. The emphasis of what was important in Buddhism changed as the different sects within Buddhism developed and evolved.
So
But
isn't that somewhat analogous to early Christianity, even when Christ was not represented in the earliest days of Christian belief? He was represented as the lamb or the cross or
The fish.
the star in the sky,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Christ
all those things. So it's
never
before,
in his lifetime, he never heard the word Christian.
right? Christ was invented by Peter,
He
by
was-
Paul, I mean.
Yeah,
The idea
and
of
let me
Christ.
say that I think to what Shoma was addressing, the Buddha was not an artist. He didn't make art.
But we have no, but
The Buddha made stillness. That's what he made. He made
No.
stillness. And true Buddhist art will bring you to a stillness. That's what true Buddhist art does. It's not about so much the beauty,
But-
although beauty can still lead you to the stillness. But that's what I think Shoma's talking
no,
about.
but there's a difference between the representation of the Buddha, meaning Shakyamuni Buddha after enlightenment, which we have accounts of even from his lifetime, because there were other kings of his time who were supposed to have representations of him that were paintings, and the concept of the Buddha, which is knowledge, which is enlightenment. So Buddh literally means enlightenment. And so you can't really capture that moment, thatness. But the Shakyamuni Buddha is, I mean, because, sorry, I'm going on and on because this is one of the chapters of my PhD thesis. So it's actually about the origin of the Buddha image. So I can give you chapter and verse of the different from the time of the Buddha, especially the Udayana Buddha, which is supposed to be the representation of the Buddha image. And that the Udayana image is the one that is regarded as one of the earliest forms of representing Shakyamuni.
But eventually, all of this concept must fall away in order to actually really find the stillness and what he came here to impart to us. Eventually, art is not necessary. Eventually, it falls away and you come to the silence.
That's what I thought I learned.
But it also depends on really the sect. So much within Buddhism, Buddhist practice depends on the sect that follows whichever form of how you attain that space of nirvana.
Yeah, some sects didn't get it.
I was intrigued when I met the abbot of Tabo, who's a very erudite Tibetan fellow appointed by the Dalai Lama to sort of run over a place where they're trying to feed the monks, so he's got this larger concern. And I rather boastfully said to him, well, if we can put this into the New York Public Library, they will save it into perpetuity. And he looked at me and said, no, they won't. It's like nothing is going to be saved into perpetuity. And he pointed to the Tabo 10th century temple. And he said, it's going to fall down someday. But Buddhism is not going to fall down. The temple is going to fall down, but Buddhism won't. And I sort of enjoyed that. And then he tempted me saying that, well, the Vajradhatu ritual has these 36 unique mudra that will live on, will live on past the architecture and the art. But it was very interesting, even his notion of getting too caught up in that which will fall apart.
The tangible versus the intangible, yeah.
So I am very much a newcomer to all of this subject, much more so than anybody else in this wonderful meeting.
Welcome.
All the things you've talked about, the one image that is absolutely sticking in my craw is the is what you did at the Victoria and Albert. And the idea of, and I think it relates to the later discussion on tourism, changing things that were not designed to be a show, for people to see, but to something experience. I understand that what you did at the V&A was by any measure extraordinary and costly, among other things. As we are more and more on this two-dimensional screen, you know, our worlds are often our screens. You know, you hear about this, all of us, whether it has to do with religion or art or human interaction, it is becoming increasingly this. We have a good reason for this now with the coronavirus, but it's not the same thing as being in the same room with someone and talking. Is there some way to scale up isn't quite the right word, but to make this kind of experience, some of the things that Diane was talking about the experience of that it wasn't the art per se, it was the experience of the quietness or the peace. I had the feeling that you generated that at the V&A, that is that people experience that at the V&A. Is there some way of, on a smaller scale, bringing that experience
That's
to a wider base?
Well, Penelope, you might be new to the discussion, but you were spot on. You're right on the money. That is exactly the issue. Barbara sort of said that. She went to Hemis twice. Once she had an experience, once she was impossible to have the experience. And
No, I have to correct. I hated Hemis from the get-go. Because tourists were pursuing monks to get the picture. And sacred space was being trammeled. It was only, and I always forget the name because I do forget names, the Winter Festival, where I came to know what it felt like to be in a real festival that had nothing to do with me.
Right, that's what I was trying to say. But Penelope, what you're saying, and one of the things that happened at this V&A thing, it was kingly. Robert Ho funded it because he wanted to. We worked directly for the Ho Foundation. So in that case, we worked for the Ho Foundation and did it at the V&A. I wasn't working with the V&A. I'm working with the V&A on a project. Yeah, so I had a separate situation there, but it was lavish, and it takes that much control. Now, one of the things that and we did achieve it, and it was hard won, but we did achieve it. And one of the things that I really thought was spectacular, we brought one of the finest No actors in Japan. All right, No is not simple. No has a mask on, a huge costumes. It takes forever. It's really slow, but it's absolutely perfect. But this fellow did a performance that had people in tears at the end. Okay, they didn't understand the language. They didn't understand all of the devices, but they could sense the heart rate. And some people after it was over were like, I've got to get some air after this performance. And so that was exactly what we were trying to bring. And we were able to do at a museum. And I think the opposite is true too, even from a museum point of view. If you take dancing and you always put it in the education department instead of in the galleries, well, that's what people are going to think of it. You know, if you show it with the same respect that you show the rest of it, people will interpret it with more respect. Now, one example that I've heard, we've done some work with Native American Indians, with the first people of America. It's really difficult to do because they all don't like each other. All right, they're very, very competitive with each other. However, in the Southwest of the United States, they really protect their dance festivals, and they don't allow cameras, and they don't allow phones. They tell people exactly what to go. And
you're speaking of New Mexico pueblos.
I think I am, where they really control those. And now they're trying the same thing.
That I've experienced. So
and so, but you see the kind of control that they do of their own. In Harlem churches now, they're having a tourism problem. And so they have finally had to come up with this little rule now that you can come for the music, but you must stay for the sermon. That you can't leave before the sermon. And they're like, yes, you're welcome, but you're not just welcome to come and listen to music and leave. So I think it goes to how they want to, and you know, we're friends. Core of Culture comes and befriends the dancers. We don't solve any problems. They solve their own problems, but we hold their hand while they do. And part of it is helping them become global advocates for themselves, because the globe will come to them even if they don't go. And a lot of them do now travel quite a bit. So I think your point is really well made, and it's getting harder and harder to have those experiences, and harder to create them and to experience them. So I think you're on to a really important
But
observation.
it's also that I think people have forgotten what those experiences are like. In a way, it's like experiencing architecture. You know, I have never been to the Hagia Sophia. I know what it looks like. I know that if I am in there, I will have an experience that I cannot possibly even imagine looking at the pictures. So for me, architecture is like that. You must be there. You can then look at the picture afterwards and be reminded of what it was like to be in Sir John Soane's study or something like that. But you can't be there without, you can't see just a two-dimensional thing. I'm suggesting that people are forgetting the experience that you offered at the V&A. I understand how extraordinary and lavish that was, but is there some way of introducing people, reintroducing people on a much more limited scope to that kind of experience?
Can I intervene? So Penelope, I think the problem is, as Joseph said, it's in our, the way in which Western museums are constructed. Because the Encyclopedic Museum, you know, coming out of Enlightenment, is really about Western art. And it's run by, even in Asia, it is essentially run on the Western model, on the European model, I should say, to be clear. And it has not adapted to other cultures, whether that is Native American or whether that's Asian. So in Asia, for example, in most parts of Asia, the arts are not divvied up by the visual versus the performing. Okay, they're all part of the same thing. Because in most cases, why is it that it is part of the same thing? Because it's religious art. It's not really art. Coming back to the point that Diane was trying to make, is that this is to serve your faith and to take you to another point. So if it comes out of that tradition, and then we're bringing a Western discipline of art history and Western museums as ways to interpret other cultures, we are still doing it through a Western lens, which means that a curator of Asian art who might understand the complexities of what Joseph is talking about and want to show it in a more 3D manner so that you're getting a holistic perspective. For example, that's what the Rubin is trying to do. But how many people are going to the Rubin? And the Rubin is one example where they're trying to get it right. But for any of us, and I am the vice president of the Association of Art Museum Curators, I can speak for all art museum curators to say that within our own institutions, we don't have that voice as Asian curators, because none of us are directors. We cannot force our learning and public education people to understand that this is integral to the representation of that object. So for example, going back to Barbara's exhibition, which you remember, it's not that we didn't try. The costs were prohibitive. We had challenges from learning and public department because they were responsible for this, not me as the curator. So I can want things, but unless I have a check there that is paying for it, even if I want it as a curator, and we keep saying in Western museums that the curator's vision is what we ultimately produce. It's not true. Maybe it is for a Western curator, but for those of us who come, who represent other cultures, unless your patron gives you that blank check, you cannot show this kind of way of which is really the true perspective of Asian religious art.
Right on.
Penelope, one thing that I saw, this is a very small way, when I looked up the articles that you had written, Joseph, there were links. And one of the Rinpoches that you interviewed, if you looked him up in YouTube, because one of the big things that I learned from him in charm dancing is watching it gives you karmic benefits. So the person in your VNA who sat through 10 hours got karmic benefits. That's the entire idea of the dance or the art. They're nothing but portals. They really fall apart. They're almost like a crutch that's there. That's why I really dislike art in that sense. They're not meant for that. The real art is within. But if you wish to see that, the YouTube links from there, he will show the Rinpoche going through each of the moves. He goes and dances through it. So if you can't really, maybe we cannot see it because we're not there, not just for Corona. If they're way up in Tibet, I can't get there anyway. But the YouTube allows you to see it because whoever videotaped these, they did it really nicely. They say the term of the dance and then he dances it out.
Yeah.
If you're willing to Google and spend time, which apparently I don't sleep, you can find a ton of it and it's
None of us
mesmerizing. I'll be happy to send you the links because I really had fun prepping for this because I thought it would be more meaningful to me. So there are many videotape links and this Rinpoche, or however you pronounce his name, who's probably the top of his line at what he's doing, very slowly. And these are extremely slow movements. And so when you say no theater, that's even slower yet. It demands time, which is what you call bhakti, devotion. Give it time. That's your best offering. So I loved it. So you can access it on YouTube.
Thank you, Shoma.
Send us the link, Shoma.
Sure, I'll be happy to.
You know,
Thank
Penelope, you raised another issue that I'm working on now, and I'm not working on now. I wish I knew how to work on it better. But you talk about this forgetting what a kind of experience was, and I'm got a commission to do a monograph on dance in Buddhism from the point of view of Western dancers who encountered Buddhism either on expeditions or who practiced Buddhism. Anthony Tudor, the great ballet choreographer from the 1930s, was a practicing Zen Buddhist. And one of his greatest ballets about a woman marrying the wrong man was a Zen ballet, for example. But I think what we're losing, and being the Western dancer who got to work in a real Asian kingdom, I'm the last one. There aren't any absolute monarchies left. And so people look back 100 years and they say, oh, they were just imperialists. They were just, they weren't, they don't even understand the relationship, what that encounter between the Empress Dowager and the Western visitor, what that was really like, what the motivations from both sides were really like. They're not the motivations of 2020 and sort of the victim mentality of a lot of people. These were really rare situations where people were exotic to one another. You know, when the liminal meet, it's when two planes of existence come together that are both on the edge of their own culture trying to meet. And I think we've lost an appreciation for what those more innocent and more pristine encounters were, because we can't have them so much now. And people disbelieve the quality of humanity was at play at those times. And so I'm trying to find a way to write, to go back and say these encounters were genuine by high-minded people on both sides that were trying to go outside of their own liminality to communicate around spiritual expression, around artistic expression, around something new to them that they liked even better than their own culture, coming from both sides. It's a very hard flavor to capture and to try to enshrine, but I'm trying to say, let's not forget it and think that everything is mass tourism and Instagram culture, because there was a time when it wasn't. And those moments of aha, the moment when you walk in the Hagia Sophia, how do you express that? How can you? And that's a really good example, because it's an example of something that still gives you that experience. And so I think that experience is really one of the great, beautiful things about living in a big globe, is the opportunity to have that experience. And I think we're losing it a lot of different ways. Over familiarity, you go to a famous place now and people take their own picture, take a picture of themselves. You know, it's just astonishing to me. You go to the Hagia Sophia, take a picture of yourself, you know? So the entire experience is sort of shifting focus.
You know, what Penelope was saying reverberated with me because I was lucky enough to stand in front of the Friday Mosque in Isfahan and just sobbing. I've never done that with a piece of architecture before, but the experience was unbelievable. And, you know, we're also talking about moving at speed. Penelope and I've talked about taking the ocean liners when we were kids. Then there was the airplane, and then there was the jet. And thank God for them. But it's the speed at which we're moving. And I see it on my own monkey brain, where I have enough trouble focusing best of times because there's so much that interests me. The technology enables me to be schizophrenic. I can do this and I can do that, and oh, I can, you know, it's frenetic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our last trip to India, we visited Nada Shastra school, and it gave us some idea of what Shoma was talking about. And we had to pay them, of course, which was nothing, but they spent 4 hours with us, these men and women, going to the hands and the swaying and no, it was just out of this world. The east coast of India, it was incredible, just south of oh my God, Madura. No, it was not Madura. It was Madras. It was just south of Madras. And they call it something else. So what is it now?
Chennai.
Chennai.
I never know where I am in India anymore.
But what happened was, after we couldn't understand, and this is it's a long experience, but I'll make it short as I can. We were talking a lot on this trip about, in India, there's a certain spirituality that permeates all behavior, regardless of socioeconomic class. There's just it just comes through. You just cannot, you're sensitive to it all. You cannot avoid it. All right, then so I went to the dance, and I noticed how women walk, and I noticed how the movement. When I saw this dance, this codification, I guess they call it, it all of a sudden made more sense. But then we went to, this is where Madura came in. We went to Madura, and there was I've never seen a city that is so wrapped up in its temple. The whole life of the city is wrapped up in the temple. You cannot go into the temple without avoiding a religious experience. Music, the kids, the dancing, the pools, everything, they're all involved in different aspects of worship. And then we went to, our guide, who was a wonderful man, said, you cannot have dinner tonight because we are going to participate. Part of the ceremony was the priest taking in all the collections people had brought to the gods and blessing it, processing it, and then handing it back to the people who need to eat. And he wanted us to be a part of that. Wow. And when I went to bed that night, for the first time in my life, the theosophy, the dance, the sociology, everything came together for me, for India, for the culture of India. And I think this is the closest I could ever experience getting to what you guys are talking about in Buddhism. But for me, it was Hinduism, because I find Hinduism is your Buddhism. I mean, I find the pantheon of gods just remarkable and the imagination phenomenal. And I can never understand. I could go forever and never get to the end of it. You know, it's like an unending onion. But I think it's a wonderful feeling, and it's just so rare, and it's so valuable because I suppose of its rarity. I just want to share that with you. It is possible.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Joseph, I'm interested that you went to Italy and you were were you in a church in Acidosis?
No, it's actually a museum. It is a, you know, if some of you know Italy, you know that these little villages are emptying out. So it's not unusual that a village that had 2,500 people now has 1,800 people. So there's a lot of things. And Namkhai Norbu is the Dzogchen master who Giuseppe Tucci helped escape from Tibet. Incredible pedigree and empirical ancestry in his own family line as well. He was one of these great polymathic visionary guys that did language, mathematics, art. His notebooks, which I've been able to see, are just explosions of numbers and creativity and drawing the diagrams, and he's clearly experiencing, well, he was the one that said, I've got all the stuff I brought from Tibet, all of this collection. And so the city of Archidoso said, we'll give you this little palace on the top of the hill opposite the castle to make into a museum. And so it is the Museum of Oriental Art and Culture, which features Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, Buddhism, Central Asian culture, Namkhai Norbu's research. They've got beautiful interactive maps, for example, of Giuseppe Tucci's expeditions. So it's a very easy way to learn about the work of Giuseppe Tucci, for example, who of course is Italian. So this is actually a museum in Archidoso at the top of the hill opposite the castle that is dedicated to Buddhist art and culture.
I find it fascinating, though, that it's even accepted in Italy, because obviously if you have 35 generations of monks, they're not celibate. And that's opposed to what Catholicism is in all of Italy.
Very much.
They had children too.
Very much. The Nepalese priest is the 135th generation. The Buddha, the Tibetan monks that I was talking about are not having kids. But what you see instead, I think, is that it's a vital concern that now in this little village, there's a vital concern. There's something interesting. There's something bringing people to the village instead of people leaving the village. So actually, this village in particular really embraced Namkhai Norbu, embraces this museum because it's really put their little village on a map, brings in a few more people to their restaurants. So they're actually very, and part of the mission of the, you know, Sherry, it's a good question. Part of the mission of the museum is to represent Italy's patrimony of Buddhism, that Italy has got generations of people who were researching Buddhism. They might say culminated in Namkhai Norbu, but Italy has a distinguished history of Buddhist researchers and expeditions, and going back to the Jesuits in the 1600s. So part of the mission of this museum is to celebrate Italy's Buddhist patrimony, as it were. So that's part of the angle that they take on it.
That's nice. I have a question for you. Behind you on your bookcase, are those dancers, statues of dancers?
Yeah. Those I got, they're hard to see. I've got a Han Dynasty tomb figure. I have an Indian bronze, and I have a Qin Dynasty tomb figure. That's my, and beyond that, I have a Cultural Revolution porcelain of the ballet of the Detachment of Red Women. So it's my my small collection of, I guess I should bury myself with them, I'm not sure.
What I think is so incredible about Zoom meetings is we get to see each other in our environments. And I love that.
No.
All you get is my window.
But it's the window to your soul, Betty. It's so nice to see you, Betty. It's nice to see
See the trees outside, but then yeah, I'd be backlit.
It's the number of books that play such a large role in almost everybody's house that I'm looking at. I love it.
Yeah, I had to finally, on this Tabo project, say I can't get more books. For every new book, one's got to go. So that's part of what I've been doing in my isolation, is getting rid of the ones that have to go so I can add my new research books.
And how long did that last?
It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process.
Something I can't do.
And Barbara, as you might imagine, I've got a whole bunch of ballet books.
Yep.
They're easier to sell than the Tibetan books.
Yes, I would imagine. But I have to admit, all of you are so good at clearing out and tidying up and using this time well. I have done nothing. I mean, there was a marvelous cartoon, probably New Yorker, where the guy was musing about the 5 weeks he's had. And he says, but I didn't learn Chinese. And I didn't, people have these enormous, okay, I'm going to use this time well.
But when Marie Kondo was having her great
God,
highlight,
yes.
when she got to the book people, she encountered uniform resistance. Does every book you have spark joy? If you haven't read it in 2 years, it should go. But perhaps you came across the Japanese concept of tsundoku.
Go on.
Which is tsundoku. And tsundoku refers to all the books you have in your library that you haven't read. And it's something that is treasured by many
people who love books. I mean, I go through my books and go, boy, that looks really interesting. I should read it someday.
Talking about Japan, guys, I want.
Out of 10 people I know.
Go ahead, Merle.
No, I was just going to say probably 9 out of 10 people I know are using this time to, in some fashion, clear out, sort, organize, retool. And I'm doing some of that. It's kind of a purification process. The goal is to simplify a bit, to create some order. And if nothing else comes out of this, yesterday was my 6th week in, I think that's really, really a positive about this horrible disease and the sort of side effect of helping us all purify ourselves.
Yeah, good point.
I have done nothing.
Well, you're not in the majority.
I have to say,
But I had a declutter in last year, and boy, did we go through this place. So at least books are where they need to be.
You know what? If you lived in
I
square foot unit like the Japanese do, you would be thinking about getting rid of stuff too. I mean, you can't afford to, I mean, not you, of course, but you have lots of space. And I have to say, as I told you before, when you gave the promised gift to the Art Institute, I came into your apartment soon after some of the objects left. And I said, it's hard to tell that anything's gone.
No, Madhu has said that, and she knows the collection. I can't tell that anything's missing.
Yeah.
Time to donate more.
And where I've had fun, and who knows what's going to happen with any of the museums I've made promised gifts to, they may not be able to afford to even accept them. Then it's up to my daughters again, and they'll die. But
No, they won't let you die.
Right.
That's a very good point, Sherry. But I was thinking that for 2 minutes about maybe one of our discussions would be what object has been the most important to us during this period. And I started looking around to try to pick the object. There is no one object. It's the ambience in what is in this apartment. Very fine, Jack. But
I
it's,
would be torn between my refrigerator and my stove.
Oh, Penelope, I was thinking I'd be torn between my stove and my television.
It's doing
I'm glad I have a few cookbooks here. I've been cooking a lot.
Me too. Me too.
We still have our local farmers market here in Santa Monica. They haven't closed it. You have to stand in line and distance and all that, but I can still get my beautiful strawberries and beautiful produce. So I've been having a lot of fun exploring food opportunities and trying to make beautiful meals once or twice a day. And so that's been it. And also when we get back to the idea of getting rid of books, I brought with me to this time a book that well, you have to 4 volumes, The Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell.
oh,
Which I read in college 50 years ago.
Wow.
And I have the same set. I have the same set. And unfortunately, they crumble as I turn each page because they're so old. But it's really, not only is it an amazing piece of literature, but it's interesting for me to use this time to think about 50 years. And why did I underline that?
Yeah.
But so I've been reading a lot.
I have found it impossible to concentrate. I'm finding it very, very difficult to read.
Shoma, I finally saw Japanese Wife.
Oh,
Oh,
what did
wow.
you think?
Oh, it's so beautiful. It's
Really?
like a
I like
poem.
most of it.
Is this a movie?
Yeah, it's a film called The Japanese Wife by Aparna Sen, and it's about 10 years old or something. But I had, for some reason, not seen it. I'd saved it. It's on Amazon Prime for those who are interested. It is so beautiful. It's really like a little poem.
Wow.
It's about this, one shouldn't talk too much about it. You should just experience it. It comes back to what Joseph was saying earlier. You know, some things have to be experienced. This has to be experienced.
And I have,
Alan, have you seen it?
Yes, I have. Yeah, and I had the good fortune of spending some time with her in Kolkata.
Beautiful.
wow.
Beautiful.
The
I can
Japanese
say
wife.
the highest,
The Japanese Wife.
that highest Sophia reference. And there's
Penelope.
another building, which I'm sure we'll all agree, is the Taj. When you see that the first time, you realize that no picture, however wonderful you've ever seen of it, begins to even approach the beauty of that building. It's just another, because the Hagia Sophia, I also agree with, was amongst the most amazing experiences. And the building itself, and I guess you have to be an architect for the exterior, because to me, the exterior didn't seem all that amazing. But when you get inside and feel that sense of space and light, that is where you say you've never experienced anything like that anywhere. Going into,
It's truly spiritual.
That's truly wonderful.
Truly
but the Taj
spiritual.
is another one of those buildings. We're looking at man-made objects that no amount of description or photography can begin to, illustrate the beauty and splendor of that building. I'm sure.
Sometimes it's just I think it's actually called Bergson's intraocular traumatic test. It hits you right between the eyes. But that happened to me.
Intraocular traumatic test. I love that.
Bergson's intraocular traumatic test. Yes. That happened to me in Ecuador, in Quito, in the Jesuit church, which I don't remember whose name it was. And I'd read about it, that that it's all covered in gold. And I saw a picture of it online. And yet when you walk into this large cathedral church, and every surface is covered with gold. This was, I might add, just before the Jesuits were thrown out of Ecuador for abusing everything. But you cannot, the pictures don't give you that experience. And what I worry about is that people don't realize what they're missing because they can see I could see dozens of pictures of this online easily. I could even probably do 180-degree panning around it, and yet nothing will convey what it's actually like to be there. And I'm sure that's true for the Taj Mahal. And
It's
other,
also a Registan Square, for example, you know, the perfection of it. It's very hard to describe because however many photographs you've taken or seen of it, so you feel the Registan Square in Samarkand, because it's the way in which those three monuments come together and create this incredible, you know, assemblage of buildings. And then it's also the color, you know, it's something about that light. And when that light falls on that tile, you know, it's an experience that no matter how many books you've seen or pictures you've seen online, it just cannot match you know, the thing of seeing it and standing there and experiencing it, you know, from different angles. With the Taj, again, because it's that white marble on marble, you know, the carving, it's just all about light and the way it falls on it, and the beauty of each carving on the Taj, or the perfection of the monument as it's framed, or the first glimpse that you get, you can't help but go, ah, Taj, you know, because it's the way in which it's framed. You know, they make it a narrow vision and then it opens up.
Do you realize the irony of what we're doing right now?
Yes, because we're on a flat little screen.
We're on a flat little screen. None of us can go anywhere. And we're having these wonderful discussions about what it feels like to be inside a space. There's a kind of longing here that is so remarkable.
I just keep thinking that I don't, you know, it just makes me want to travel so much. And the idea that travel is going to be completely different in the future is, I think this is my way of expressing my sorrow.
But, you know, but I think that the crisis that we're in right now just accentuates this difference between actual dimensional reality, you know, and living on these little screens. And, you know, a lot of times museums, you know, want to put all their exhibits online. It's like, well, that's nice, but that's not experiencing things.
I've kind of trying to avoid some of these. Every gallery, everybody is saying, oh, come on the virtual tour. And I'm thinking,
that's right.
I haven't been on any of them.
Me either.
You can just sort of get your appetite. Since you can't have the full meal right now, you can have little tastes of things. I think it's sweet.
But if it's, I've told you all about my modern Met, which has all sorts of oddball postings, and it's not it's about the metropolitan city, not the Metropolitan Museum. And they have come up with some fascinating, for lack of a better word, exhibitions. One was about glass butterflies that an artist does. They're all going extinct, but the artist created glass butterflies for you to enjoy. Now, I would like to hold one of those butterflies, but this was pretty interesting. Speaking of Hagia Sophia, there is a marvelous documentary. I'll have to find the name. And it's about 3 cities. Istanbul is one of them. And what we don't get to see that is part of the archaeology of the city. And they take you through it physically. And you won't get to see that when you're in Istanbul because very few people know about it. I'll try to find the name of that. I think it's either BBC, but I saw it on PBS, and I'll forward that link to you.
I have to go, guys. I'm going to say thank you to Joseph and to Barbara, and good to see all of you. And hope we can through this again. I'll send off our screenshot, our masked.
Oh, cool.
Who are those masked people?
Who is that masked
I
man?
see you, Betty.
Right.
Yeah, I need to go as well.
Thank
so I'm
you.
gonna say
Bye.
I think
Joseph, thank you so much. Bye.
and
Thank you very
There
much.
was something else that
It
you
just
had
appeared
said.
on my screen and I can't figure out how to leave.
Now,
Well, I see your name, but I don't. Where's
Yeah,
every-
I have another web page that has somehow just appeared in that left-hand corner of my screen, and I can't get to the leave meeting area. So if I suddenly never mind, I may suddenly disappear.
You have
I ended
Sure,
up
all of us.
making the recording because I became the host, but I don't know how to retrieve the recording. So
It'll come
Okay.
automatically, Joseph.
oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
It'll come in maybe an hour or 2 or 3, you'll get it.
Will it come to Joseph or will it come to me?
If he's the host, it'll go to his email.
If you're shared
Okay.
posts, it'll go to both of you.
Yeah.
Oh, great, great.
Well, the weird thing, Alan, which I don't understand, is when I was working with Ross, I could do the co-host, but both with Madhu and with Joseph, I had to make the other person the host. What's going on?
You can be a co-host, but you have to go and adjust it in the settings.
That worked.
You have to
I
check the
think
settings.
you didn't adjust it in the settings, that's all.
I thought I had. Oh, well, I'll ask
So
my guru.
before everybody goes, I
We
just
have
want
to
to tell a
go.
very funny Picasso story that is
Everybody.
relevant to everything we've been talking about, which is that towards the end of World War II, an American soldier went to visit Picasso, and they were talking, and the soldier said, "Oh, I have this wonderful girlfriend." And Picasso said, "Oh, you do?" And he says, "Yes, let me show you her." And he takes out a little picture, and he shows him the picture, and he says, "She's lovely, but she's so small." And with that, I will leave too.
Bye, Heather.
Bye,
Pleasure meeting you.
everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Marvelous
It was just
presentation.
wonderful.
Thank you,
I'll
Joseph.
be in touch about our next
Joseph.
presenter.
Okay.
Bye.
Hey, everybody.
Beautiful.
Thanks a million. I really appreciated being the opportunity to do this.
So
Love you, Joseph.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
Barbara.
Barbara. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Ciao, ciao.